Hi, and welcome to Infused Eats, the cooking show where everything is infused with cannabis, especially me, your host, Matt Lamb. Today, we're making chicken Alfredo sourdough pizza. Now, this recipe has a whole lot of ingredients. We're using just regular fresh cannabis, about 2 grams, but all the rest of the ingredients you can find on infusedeats.com. It's completely free, but you can check that out and get this recipe and dozens more recipes written out with the full ingredients and instructions. But let's get started. Breaking this into 3 phases. Phase 1 is the dough. To prepare our cannabis, we're going to go ahead and make sure we pull any stems and seeds. If you have any, go ahead and grind that up pretty fine. Use a grinder and get it pretty fine, or chop it with a knife until it's very fine. Put that in a oven-safe dish. And then cover it with foil if you want to try to keep down the smell. But keep in mind it still will smell pretty strongly throughout the house. Put that in the oven, preheated 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 25 minutes. Once our cannabis is activated, or that was a decarboxylation step that we just did. We decarboxylated the cannabis. That's activating it, turning it from THCA to THC so that it'll be psychoactive when we ingest it a little bit later. Keeping that right in that same oven-safe bowl that I used to decarb in, I'm adding in 2.5 tablespoons of olive oil. I'm using light olive oil. You could also use extra virgin if you want. Doesn't really matter. It may have a little bit more flavor. We're going to put that back in the same oven at 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. It's going to infuse the cannabis into the olive oil, the THC. And once that's completed, you're going to go ahead and strain that through a fine mesh strainer. We're going to separate out the cannabis from the oil, press it through a little bit there. And then we have our 2 tablespoons of pretty strong infused cannabis there, or olive oil, and then we're taking the cannabis and putting that right back into that same container again. Now we're jumping ahead a little bit to the next step by going ahead and doing this, but we're going to infuse this same cannabis again, this time with butter. You can wait and do this as a full next step, but I'm going to go ahead and get that back into the oven to save a little time. And so I'm going to infuse that butter for 1 hour also in the oven, and we'll use that in the next step. But now we're moving on with our dough step. This is a sourdough pizza crust. So I'm using a sourdough starter that I started a few years back there. It's almost 6 years old. It's a nice tangy sourdough starter. You can omit the starter and just use the same recipe without the starter if you want just a traditional pizza crust. But I recommend the sourdough. And so we're adding in all of our ingredients for our dough. I've added in the hot water, the yeast. I added in that infused olive oil. Now I'm adding in the sourdough starter. I also added in a teaspoon of sugar and also adding in a teaspoon of salt. So that's all my wet ingredients for my pizza dough, including the sourdough starter. Now I'm also going to go ahead and whisk in 1 of the cups of flour. Just going to add my cups of flour one at a time. And you can see here that yeast in that sourdough starter is really starting to churn the bacteria in there. You can see the yeast are really reacting, and it's the little bubbles coming up there. So that's really what we're going for with this tangy, delicious sourdough pizza crust. And now I'm adding in another cup of the flour. That's my second of possibly 3 cups of flour. And then about half of the 3rd cup, I'm going to go ahead and add that in. I'm getting close to enough flour, I think. And you can tell when your dough ball starts to pull away from the pan and form together in a ball. You've probably added enough flour. And then you can generously flour your board and start kneading that. Now, sourdough starter especially kind of makes the dough a little bit more elasticy sometimes and a little bit more tacky and sticky. So just keep adding flour as necessary and add in as much dough as you want. As much flour as you think is necessary to create a nice supple dough. We're going to knead that about 8 to 10 minutes. And just make sure you knead it good. And once you've kneaded it properly, you're going to put that in an oiled bowl, with a little olive oil. And we're going to put that in a warm place and for about 30 minutes and let that double. And make sure you keep that covered too so it doesn't dry out. So after 30, 45 minutes it's doubled, you can punch it down and deflate the dough and let it rest about 10 minutes before you move on. So my dough is rested now. And you can see this is a really soft dough. It's mainly because of the sourdough. And we're going to tuck and fold that into a sort of a tight dough ball, as tight as you can get that soft dough. And then we're going to put that back into our oiled bowl like we did before, turn it over, and then cover it with a saran wrap. And put that in the refrigerator this time. We're going to let that completely chill. You can let that stay up to 45 minutes. For up to 24 hours. Okay, and that was phase 1. That was the longest and hardest step. Now we're moving on to phase 2, making the sauce. So our dough ball is chilling in the oven. We've got that butter that you saw, that butter I had there, that's in the oven, and it's infusing in the oven, that second round of the butter. So while that butter's infusing, go ahead and chop your parsley. I'm going to go ahead and crush and mince my garlic. I'm going to go ahead and do both cloves. I need a clove for the chicken that I'm going to cook for the topping a little bit later, so I'm going to go ahead and mince them together, but then I'll make sure I separate it out into two different dishes there. So I have my 2 cloves of garlic separated and minced. And at this point, my butter has been fully infused. It's infused a little over an hour now in the oven. And I'm going to strain that cannabis out of the infused butter right into a small saucepan. And we're going to make our sauce right into this pan. So I've got my infused butter there in the bottom. I'm adding in now the heavy cream. This is over medium-low heat. Just keep it nice and low. And we're going to bring that up to a simmer and let that simmer together about 5 minutes so it'll start incorporating together. We can also add in our garlic and let that sweat into there for a couple of minutes. Then we're also going to mix in our cheese, stir in the cheese until it's fully incorporated. So 3/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. You can use freshly grated Parmesan, it'll be a lot better. So make sure you get that whisked together, nice and melted and smooth. And then we're going to actually whisk in our parsley, that is fresh parsley. Make sure you use fresh parsley too, or you want to use all fresh ingredients if possible here. And then we're going to take that off the heat. Our sauce is finished, but we're going to let it completely cool. And now we're moving on to the pizza stage. That's phase 3. We're coming down the hill on this pretty complex and long recipe. So with our chicken breast here, we need about 1 large chicken breast per pizza. And I'm going to take that chicken breast and cube it as best I can into equal size cubes so to make a nice even pizza crust so that it'll cook evenly across. Okay, we're going to take a pan with a tablespoon of olive oil, the remainder of that minced garlic that we had from before, and brown that garlic in our pan over medium-high heat. We're going to add in our chicken. Go ahead and season that up to taste with salt and pepper. And so basically we're just cooking off the topping here so that our pizza topping is fully cooked. We don't want to rely on the pizza process to cook the topping, and we also don't want to cook the oils and moisture out of the chicken down into our pizza. So we want to make sure we get this chicken fully cooked to begin with, and go ahead and drain off the liquid. And there's no really need to brown this fully because it will brown off in the oven. But just make sure it's fully cooked. And then we're going to set that aside and let it cool off while we go ahead and prep the remainder of our pizza toppings. I'm using baby portobello mushrooms here. Then I'm using red bell pepper, mainly for the color, but also for their nice mellow flavor. I'm going to slice those thin, and I'm also going to slice thin, and the long thin slices, this red pepper. I'm sorry, that's a red onion. Obviously, that's an onion, but I use the red onion for the color mainly. All right, so we're moving on now. We're getting the pizza just about ready. We got all our ingredients ready to go. We've got our large pizza pan greased up, and then we've got our pizza dough that's been chilled. Now we're going to start forming like a little lip around the outside. You can see I'm forming the crust around the edge. About 1 inch or so around the edge is thicker, and then I'm using my palm to flatten out the inside. And then transfer it to your pizza pan when it's still smaller than the pan so you can stretch it into the pan and form it out properly. You see we got a nice even pizza crust there. If you're a real pizza maker, know how to slap it back and forth or toss it in the air, feel free to get crazy with it. But this dough, just so you know, the sourdough tends to be really elasticy and easy to break, so handle your dough very carefully here. And then, okay, now we're going to spread across the top with our, this is our homemade and infused Alfredo sauce there. You see it's cooled off and it's a lot more creamy now and a lot easier to spread, so let that cool off completely before you do this. Then we're going to spread about 3/4 of our mozzarella cheese and then top it with the chicken. We're adding in the mushrooms here, all the remaining toppings, the onions, the peppers. Just get it even as you can. Leave a little bit of lip there if possible. It's okay if some of the cheese, it's even preferred if some of the cheese spills across the lip though. Okay, we have our oven preheated to 475 degrees. That's a blazing hot oven. Put that in there for 12 to 14 minutes. And about halfway through the cooking, it's going to be a really good idea to pull the pizza out very carefully because it's super hot and spinning it about a half a turn around so that it'll cook evenly, because sometimes the back of the oven may be a little warmer than the front of the oven near the door where heat escapes. So about halfway through, after about 7 minutes, give it a spin. Then in just under 15 minutes, your pizza should be ready. And you'll know it's ready when the cheese is bubbling all the way across the middle of the pizza and your edge is nice golden brown. You can see the cheese is molten and bubbling all the way around. And this is an extra step if you just want to go the extra mile and make this pizza even more delicious. You can brush the edge generously with some melted butter and then sprinkle it with some Parmesan cheese. Top it with a little bit of your remaining parsley for more color on top. And you've got one delicious and pretty potent pizza here that's going to be probably one of the most delicious pizzas you've had if you do it to this recipe. Everyone that's had this pizza loves it. That sourdough crust, as you can see, it's got that big air bubbles from the sourdough, the nice tangy flavor combined together with that Alfredo sauce. This is a great pizza. I hope you try it. I hope you like it. Check out the full recipe on infusedeats.com. It's completely free. And I hope you enjoyed this recipe. If you did, please hit the like button. And also make sure you're subscribed to RuffHouse Studios for more recipes and other cannabis culture videos made just for you. This is Matt from RuffHouse Studios. Thank you for watching.